Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming to join our panel experts. I'm going to run through the names of our panelists and give you a little information about them and then dive into some questions. Well, we know Mark very well. Mark is CEO of XMOS. Next to him, we have Garrick Schmitt. He's Executive Vice President and Global Experience Director at Essence Global Limited, a global media agency. Amanda Abrams, she's Group Creative Director of Team One, the ad agency for Lexus. Reghu, who gave me permission to not have to pronounce his last name. He's the VP of Software Engineering for Deutsche Telekom, just launched Europe's first smart speaker in September. Next to him, we have Jason Acker. So far, I'm doing good. Digital Director at Diageo, which if you've been at CES as long as I have, you've had some of their liquors so far. And then at the end, we have Ken Lagana, Executive Vice President of Digital Sales at radio.com. So we're here to discuss the explosion in audio. And I thought it would be great for our panelists if we can just come up the line. What do you think is driving the explosion in audio? Ken, why don't you start?
Man, there are, I think, so many things. I'll throw, just a couple out. I think we've really become a binge-driven culture, and I think, what digital audio and the ability to, podcasting, for example, as an example, if you get hooked on a podcast and you're on season 3, you have the ability to listen to every one of those seasons and binge on that podcast in one sitting. I think, on demand has become huge. Time shifted listening is massive in this space, and the technology hadn't existed before the last few years to listen to your favorite radio station or your favorite radio program that you might miss in the morning, but you can listen to it now in the afternoon. So that's, I think, fantastic. And then also, look, smart speakers, are clearly driving consumption. And, the last thing that I'll throw out, so I don't steal everybody's answers here, is, you're starting to see more and more cars on the road, and Amanda can probably speak to this, that have tech that enables, app-driven audio listening opportunities. And there's a point in time where, people are starting to trade in their cars and trade up, and we're starting to hit critical mass there. So the ability to listen to time shifted and binge and all of those things and listen to digital audio is now. So a couple of thoughts.
Jason, is there anything he didn't say that you would add?
Did I take all your answers?
We're all done here. No, I think Ken's right. I think it comes down to the availability of listening to audio, right? There are so many different ways now, and it's so easy. Just look outside. Everyone's got their AirPods in their ears. There are voice assistants everywhere, whether it's your car, whether it's your watch, whether it's your phone. So the availability and the ease of access to audio is bigger than it's ever been. That's one. I think number 2 is content. I think the investment and production of content over the past 5 years has been a tremendous driver of the growth of audio. There's just so many different areas and verticals that people have access to now. It's for either entertainment or utility or just plain information.
I mean, just think about how many TV shows, movies now are getting driven by podcasting. That hasn't happened before. So to your point, the content continues to scale and get better and better.
It's great.
Reghu, you have a perspective on, to Jason's point, on availability of listening, of devices that you can listen to, being that it's a different market in Germany for smart speakers. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we at Deutsche Telekom, so we launched the first European smart speaker last year. And during that journey, to really bring the product out at a quality that customers would love to buy the product, we were facing a lot of issues when it came to the whole voice processing, right? I mean, that's at the end, when you talk to a speaker, and you would expect that to answer. It sounds so simple, but it's incredibly difficult to get that. And the problem starts early on, right? I mean, it starts from the audio front end. So it starts from the microphones. It starts from the digital signal processing that's on the devices, and that's exactly where we did some XMOS, trying to fix all of that stuff. And end of the day, we launched the product. So it's out there. And what we're also seeing is that people are getting very accustomed to having multiple of these devices at home, right? So there's more and more of these devices getting in there, and people are really becoming very familiar and getting used to having these assistants around and having to talk to them and get their daily stuff done.
Amanda and Garrick, too, you guys both come to this from a storytelling perspective. What kind of storytelling formats are driving an audio explosion, do you see? Or what ways do you have to change the way that you tell stories as the method of audio delivery is changing?
Yeah, it's ironic that I'm on a panel about voice, but using it now.
That's ironic.
Yeah, that's exactly it. You do have to really think about the space that you're in and deliver the right kind of content for that space. What's amazing about it is that there's so many different types of content, and people are super hungry for it. People look to podcasts to be informative. They look to podcasts to be useful, to be entertaining. So there's such a wide variety. And in terms of having that visual element removed, it actually is kind of freeing creatively, because it forces you to really dig in, get to the meat of the story, and tell something truly compelling and true, and not rely on anything else, and give people back their imaginations to picture the things that you're saying.
Yeah, I think it is the most personal relationship that you can have at the moment. For most people, they cannot successfully multitask and follow a story audibly while reading something. And so I think we just have to keep thinking about the context of that. And I think it challenges us from an advertising perspective, from a content creation perspective. I just think it's a whole new world. And I don't think we're going to be able to sort of rip and replace from what's been working in, say, terrestrial radio and then just drive it over. We have to think about it in new ways.
Mark, I know that this is a topic that you have some thoughts on. This situation of designing when you don't have a remote or a screen to lean on. What are some of your thoughts about how that's a different challenge and how XMOS addresses it?
I think, it is certainly a different challenge. It is a challenge. The first thing that I think you need to do is to just recognize that controlling something by voice requires a rethink of the way things have been done before. I think if you think you can, the best solution is to take a remote control and then create voice interfaces that are sort of volume up, volume down, channel 1, 2, 3, and 4. You're missing a huge opportunity. What we want to do is to say, I'd like to, stream season 3, episode 4 of House or something, and have your smart TV go and find that episode for you. And it may be that in the not too distant future, your smart TV can flip your user context. So it's actually, not only does it bring up House, but it also brings up the other things that you might be halfway through watching. So I think there's stepping back and reconsidering how users interact with some of this consumer electronics technology is necessary in order to deliver the best customer experience.
Right.
Yeah. And sorry,
please.
Adding to what Mark said, the mistake a lot of people do is they kind of take the existing navigational patterns and then try to implement voice interfaces with that, right? So whatever you would see on the desktop or on a mobile device or a mobile application, we need to really rethink how voice user interfaces can get somebody to do what they want, right? And that requires really a different kind of design philosophy that you should look at it from end to end.
And I also think, I think search, content discovery are still challenged, in this space. And although, you saw Google double down with Zach Renault and his team, a couple of years ago in terms of elevating the audio experience from a search perspective. I think that and you see Spotify doing different things. We're doing different things on the radio.com platform to surface unique content based on listening environments and experiences. But it's still a challenge today, and it's something that we have to solve for, because we have all this fantastic content across the board that we just need better ways to surface it and make it more discoverable. So I think from a hardware standpoint and a even a software perspective, that's something we could use your help on, guys.
I'm sort of curious, Jason, just from a brand perspective, how are you thinking about it differently from an advertising perspective, from a brand building perspective?
Well, it's funny, you said something a minute ago about how it's it's very storytelling, and it's like a very personal sort of situation, right? And I think that's why brands are so attracted to it, because it's a medium still that's very much requires a lean in attitude, right? Because if you're listening to a podcast, you're listening to it for a reason. You want to actually hear, and I think that's why brands love it, because what we're seeing from like early tests is that brand awareness is actually, you could drive brand awareness, and you could drive brand equity through good creative in podcasts, right? So I think that's why brands are really flocking to the platforms. Where at the Diageo, we're certainly thinking very much about the type of content we're putting out there on platforms, the type of creative that we're running. We're even starting to think now, and we haven't done this before, is what do our brands sound like? What is our sonic identity for our brands? We've spent so much time thinking about what our brands look like, and it's almost like a harken back to like the early days of radio. Like what is your consistency in audio? And that's what we're focusing a lot on now.
Yeah, and I think just from your standpoint and from your perspective, I mean, it's engagement versus interruption, right? I mean, historically, media has been about an interrupted experience, and in the podcast space, you have such a super engaged listener that sonic branding almost becomes more important than other types of branding, because you have somebody that's so focused on that content. So, and then how you leverage your sonic brand across, different audio platforms becomes super important.
Yeah, it's super relevant. It's super important to be relevant in that space.
Yeah.
So that people aren't just listening to you, they're actually hearing what you have to say. And one of the things Lexus is doing right now is partnering with Malcolm Gladwell to do a podcast series, because the Lexus design philosophy is based on studying people, how they tick, what motivates them, how they react to things. And that curiosity about people really aligns well with Malcolm Gladwell and the way he studies and observes the world. So knowing that, we don't want to go out into the podcast space and just talk about ourselves, but someone who's really like well-defined and has a huge following in that space for what he does, to be curious about us and study us and tell people the Lexus story in a way that interests him and interests his audience.
And I think, we talked about quality of content and where podcasting sort of started and how far it's come just in terms of quality of content, but even how brands, think about it and how they've, really jumped in with both feet. And Amanda, you can speak to this better than anybody. Malcolm Gladwell's revisionist history. Any listeners, any followers out there? Malcolm, cool. Thank you. Keep listening. But when we struck that deal with Amanda and her team, Amanda spent a week in Japan with Malcolm Gladwell and literally got amazing content that he's now packaging up and reformulating to Gladwellize it, if you will. Is that a word? But that's the level of detail that we're starting to get into from a branded content perspective, and it's really moving the needle for big brands.
And it's great for us too, because it forces us to dig deep and really find those rich stories, rather than just relying on something that can quickly go into a 30-second ad. We're going to do a whole series telling the story of the brand.
Yeah. What I love about that example too is about thinking about it is that you're distinctly thinking about how you're reaching people, and it's a bespoke approach. And so it's not, from a media perspective, we're always focused on context and how do we be relevant? How do we be most relevant? And I think it's really hard if you still take a one-to-many approach and you're just sort of fracturing it and sending it through the system. Yeah. And when you think about audio and what it allows, and also the cost of audio is comparison to video, to film, to cinema. Like it enables such a degree of freedom, and I think that is also why we're seeing such a renaissance with it as well.
Yeah, that flexibility is huge. You're absolutely right. I mean, I lived in the video space for many years, and to do the kind of to create the kind of content that Amanda and her team worked with Malcolm and our team on probably would have cost 5x if there was a video component to that.
And you're able to produce it lean, travel lean, and have this type. You don't have a big crew to set up, and there's not much production on the back end to get it on air either. All of these things add to the accessibility for.
Yeah, and quick side note just on that, and we'll stop beating this dead horse for a second, but what's always amazing, and when you really think about what audio and voice and engagement really looks like in the podcast space and the audio space in general, these hosts, these DJs, these talk radio hosts, whoever it might be, they really have become social influencers in their own right. And I was talking to Malcolm last week, just catching up on how everything went when he was out there. And one of the stories that he told me, and you forget this, and these guys meaning the hosts forget this, but every once in a while somebody will come up to them, and this happened in Japan. Somebody, and I don't know if you were there when this happened, but some gentleman came up, younger gentleman came up to Malcolm and just started talking to him as if he's known him for like 100 years, like he was his best friend. And I think that's the power that I think audio can really drive, is that one-to-one connection and that engagement, because you actually start to feel like you know these people. It's crazy. And you hear podcast hosts and talk radio hosts and DJs talk about that all the time. Sometimes we forget about that connection.
It comes across as much more authentic when the host is reading. You get the sense, especially in podcasts, because it is so personal, that they actually do believe in the product that they're talking about. And we're seeing that also in the early testing that we're doing, that the host reads are way more impactful than a mid-roll spot or something like that.
And it also becomes unskippable in a way.
Yes.
Or less likely to skip, less likely to hit the button, because it becomes part of, and not only do you have that affection, but it also becomes incredibly difficult to decide to interrupt yourself. To interrupt yourself and then try to find yourself back into it. And I think, one of the responsibilities we have, like when we think about all this, is like, how do we actually create these things that are in many ways unskippable, that are so compelling that you want to keep going through it? Because it is not yes, it's easy to hit the button to some extent, but it's also sort of a pain at the same time. And if we can take all that friction out by just putting compelling content out there from a brand perspective, from an advertiser's perspective, that actually marries the content, I think you'll see it further sort of accelerate as opposed to decline.
So as you're building audio experiences, audio interfaces, and I'd like to hear Jason address this first if you could, how are you balancing utility and entertainment? You had, Jason with Diageo, you guys had a skill that addressed it in an interesting way.
Yeah, so we had built a skill first on Amazon around trying to balance the utility of what people are looking for from a beverage alcohol company, which is primarily around cocktail recipes and how to serve, what to gift, where to find a bar, where to find a liquor store or a retailer that sells our products. That's sort of like brass tacks, right? We do that in search, we do that on the happy hour skill. We wanted something a little bit different than to break through the clutter, because frankly, there's a lot of cocktail recipe skills out there. We try to provide an experience for in-home around party games or little tidbits and little facts, perhaps using some of our celebrity influencer voices within the skill itself. What we found, quite frankly, is that the utility was the most used aspect of it, and maybe we just haven't gotten the entertainment yet. There is something there, and I think as the technology continues to progress and you're able to use real voices within the devices, I think that will become sort of a bigger opportunity for us. But we found that the utility aspect for us was bigger. The biggest challenge we have is scaling these things as there's so many different skills, and it's very hard to break through the clutter with these.
What was that
skills.
one app that you guys created? Was it the bartender app where you could create the liquor, a drink based on the liquor you had in your house or something?
Oh yeah, the bar.com. Essentially, we had a device on the website. Essentially, like if you have this, if you have whiskey, if you have Johnny Walker, here's what you can create in your home. But so we sort of tried to replicate that through the skill.
Right.
Yeah.
I thought that was really unique.
Yeah, it's good.
Well, a discussion of breaking through the clutter leads to a discussion of measurement and what we know about the things people are getting to actually hear on these devices. We've got a lot of people from the creator side, storytelling side, and also some people from the hardware side. Does anyone want to take a swing at that about what's lacking in terms of measurement? How hardware is going to start to be able maybe to deliver on that?
Well, I can jump in. I think there is a relative misnomer that in audio that especially in things like podcasting, that it's not measurable. And today, we actually have the ability to target demographics and psychographics across our podcast platform. You can geo-target. We actually can do things like real attribution. We have the ability to onboard first-party data, which is what every advertiser is looking for today. And you can either in segments or deliver custom messages to people that you're looking to speak to differently as a brand. So look, I think that measurement is here, and it's only getting better, frankly. I think that's the good news.
Yeah, there's what can be done, and there's what should be done.
Right.
I think certainly it's possible to measure whether there's somebody in the room. So if you're playing your podcast to an empty room, you might want to know that. You might also want to know whether somebody appears to be distracted, but there's big privacy issues around that. So, and one of the things quite interesting about maintaining and obviously trying to enhance your brand equity is you're trusting the provider of the audio interface, be it the input interface and the voice that you hear when you first say Alexa, and in the future you'll be trusting that entity potentially with push notifications to proactively advertise your content, and the implications of getting that wrong, of being an annoying interruption, which is actually very difficult for us to ignore. It's easy for us to filter through peripheral vision, visual clutter, but actually voice-based clutter interruptions are very difficult and very annoying. So there's a lot of trust that needs to go into the device at the end that is responsible for picking that moment for delivering that message, and that's based on there is a hardware component to that, because the hardware needs to identify the audio context. Is it an appropriate time? Is it not an appropriate time? And if it is appropriate, then to deliver. So I think there's definitely a chain of technologies, a chain of things that need to be done there.
Reghu, you have an interesting perspective on the consumer comfort level with privacy.
So I think, from a hardware and software point of view, you can measure a lot of things, you can log a lot of things, and like what Mark said, data privacy, that's going to play a big role. Yeah. Especially when we brought the speaker out to the market in Europe, in Germany, which is a very highly privacy conscious country. There was a lot of things that we had to do to build privacy into the device, right? So starting from the button that allows you to stop the speaker from listening to it. It's actually a hardware button, so it's not even a software switch. So that's the kind of things that we did to increase the trust customers would have on the whole privacy aspect. Because I think someone today morning was most likely Brett, who said that he doesn't think of privacy as a big thing when it comes to voice. I disagree with that. I think privacy plays a big role. Data privacy and protection plays a big role on how people perceive voice assistants, especially with all those scandals that recently around, who was listening to your data to do machine learning and all of that stuff. So that really makes it, a hot topic. And I think the people who are building these products, so the hardware, software, we really have a responsibility to keep that privacy aspect in mind when we are building those stuff.
Well, let's talk about the levels of commitment you have to dedicate to an audio product well in advance to actually make it successful. It seems like you have to put in more time, more investment, more dollars into making something that's going to work well in an environment where everything's changing rapidly? Garrick, is that something that
I think it's an awesome question. I mean, where I was going to go on the measurement one, which I think is, but it goes right into it. Is I think we have to acknowledge that it's a new space. Like for most, even though yes, audio has existed forever, but it is a relatively new space. And I think from when I think about it from a brand, like a media perspective, it's not yet super easy to figure out how to go across. I mean, I don't know how many podcasts there are. Hundreds of thousands.
There's
beyond.
I think over 800,000.
800,000. Yeah. But you can't sit here today, from a brand perspective, and say like, yes, I want to get all sports and I want to lock it in. Like you can't do it that way. And so I think we have to A, acknowledge that, but B, we also have to make the commitment that there's so much opportunity. And, in some of the studies that I have seen, let alone like beyond just what we've experienced on behalf of our clients, is that, we're really concerned about how effective is advertising with those audiences. And people are way more receptive to it, significantly more receptive to it, partially because it's new, but partially because it's intimate and they have undivided attention. I think Netflix had that classic comment when they said their only competition is sleep. And I think in many ways, audio starts to capture that other part. We're a culture, a global culture that's always in motion, and audio taps into it. So, but I do think you have to be committed to it. But I also think you can't expect it to be just like the other formats instantaneously.
And sorry, go ahead. Did you have something to add?
No, I was just going to say, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's when you think about, and I'll just talk about podcasting. Podcasting was built on the backs of direct response advertising. So and they haven't gone away. Direct to consumer brands are all over podcasting because of one thing: it works. And it really works. And I think there's a stat that I saw that said something like 70% of people bought something based on a podcast ad that they listened to. So I think the good news is that we feel really good that it's working, and now that brands are really moving into the space, there's an opportunity to figure out how the brand side can complement a DR angle.
What are the breakthroughs that need to happen to make that possible? What are the things that are lacking to be able to really mobilize on that?
I mean, I think from my perspective, just not to beat measurement to death. I think there is a lot of work to be done there for brands for
That much.
There's for radio.com to start to see the big brand dollars that TV's getting, you were going to have to start to understand total reach across all audio platforms. We're going to have to understand when people are skipping our ads. I think it's going to get there, and we're going to continue to test, but there's going to get to a point where we're not going to be able to scale because I can't go to my CMO and with like, I think it worked. They got a little bit of a lift, so it's going to it'll get there.
But that's the age-old challenge in every medium, right? I mean, it's like, how do I know that, in television that I'm unduplicating on OTT and SVOD and all of those other platforms.
100%. I mean, so much of this is so nascent right now still, but but I think good marketers will continue to test and learn and scale just like any other.
I think the upper hand that audio has, frankly, than other platforms is it's relatively contained versus where video has become an unleashed beast across every single platform, right? Yeah. And I think it's more containable in audio. So I think we're going to get there more quickly than maybe our video brethren.
Yeah, I think that's probably right because it is focused. You're right there. Yeah.
Well, in the time we have left, which is we're almost out of time, shockingly. We started out talking about what's driving audio explosion today. I'm curious what you think is going to be driving it tomorrow. Ken, when I talked to you before, you brought up, voice-activated wall planes. Like, is that something that's going to be driving the explosion of audio? And if not, what do you think it's going to be in 20 seconds or less?
I think that content it's really all about, content and, the fact that, this is a screenless world, a screenless environment, the world of audio is, we love that. We need to lean into that utility. And, where we excel is in people's personal time, the space when they're walking their dog in the morning before they go to work, when they're working out, when they're, walking on the beach, when they're hiking. So, I think, as the content continues to get better and better, there's more access points across the ecosystem. That's not going away. That's only increasing. The only place to go is up here for us.
That's great. It was not 20 seconds or less, so penalized. Jason, what do you think is going to be driving audio explosion? Is anything going to be changing that drives it?
I think just the technology itself, the fact that 5G is becoming more scalable, so there'll be just more access for people to listen to audio and bigger. I also think the talent that's coming into the space is pretty amazing. Like A-list Hollywood talent are now of audio content.
Yeah, 5G is a massive piece of this we didn't talk about.
You've had your time, Ken. We're moving on to Reghu. What do you think? The explosion of audio.
So I think technology definitely,
Yeah.
and also the consumption that's going to drive that as well.
Amanda, do you have a
God, he
thought?
was way shorter than yes, entertainment is going to continue to grow, but also usefulness. I think brands finding and building and making skills that are easy and useful to people will be the next big place that we go. And understanding where people are listening to audio, there's so many opportunities within a vehicle, just a vehicle alone, of understanding when someone's on their commute to work, how long that is, the mood they're in, and catering what they're hearing to those sentiments.
Mm-hmm.
Garrick, what do you think?
I would just say talent is coming. I think, you guys talked about Malcolm Gladwell, who's a big name, but I mean, they're much bigger, like, Hollywood names, music names, and I think the more that they come, the more it will grow.
And Mark, what do you say?
So maybe we talked a lot about content, but in terms of voice interfaces, I think they're just going to become, over the next few years, significantly more accessible from an economical perspective. So they'll just proliferate everywhere. And I think the difference between a 95% and success rate on word recognition and a 97% success rate is huge for the user experience. It doesn't sound like much, but it's a really huge difference. It's quite an interesting exercise to go and cross out words in a book, 3 and 100, and see whether you can still understand what's going on. That's happening over time, because obviously these machine learning algorithms are learning all the time. So we're going to get very much more accessible hardware, very much more accessible, economically accessible voice interfaces, and they will become more effective. And I think that's going to be a game changer.
Thank you, panelists, and thank you for joining us, everyone.
Thanks.